All right, part 4 of the final report, evaluating. And so far at this stage, we haven't actually allowed, or haven't talked about the evaluation yet. So you might want students just to, have 10 to 15 minutes to share and talk about this in their groups, what the limitations were, especially of their experiment. But before we get into that, we can recap, right? What are they evaluating? So if you've done quantitative methods before you get into the IA, which I recommend doing, that's chapter 6 of the textbook, then they should have an idea of internal validity, generalizability, external validity, those types of things, right? So we're just going to review that. And this is what they need by the end. So their evaluation begins with the summary of their study in relation to the original study and theory, strengths, then limitations and modifications. I've got an example. I've taken the example about body dissatisfaction and made it a little bit weaker, and I put that in the files. They can mark it, be an examiner. I think the evaluation's got so much to do that I probably won't do this in my classes. My classes are only 50-55 minutes, so this activity I'm not sure I'd do in my classes. I'll just let my students get straight into writing for themselves. But I included it there just in case you want to do it. Okay, so this is just again to recap. We've looked at this slide already, but just to recap what they need. Okay, so what to do for reference to the originals. I think they should open with a very brief statement of their results, just restating what they found out. And that's just standard practice in most discussions in psychology articles. Then they explain how this relates to the original study, right? So did it support it? Was it consistent? Was it similar, but their difference was much smaller? You know, they're just comparing it in regards to the original study. And then they conclude, what does this suggest about the theory or model that their study is based on? And I would get them to really avoid making definitive comments like, this study proves that theory wrong. Right? And so you just want to stand that down. Try and get them to understand why. Right? Does it really prove that theory wrong? How old is that theory? How many studies have been conducted in support of that theory? And you're going to say that your one little study on your little group of participants. So if they're making that definitive claim, we can then talk about, it's a chance for learning, about the research process and gathering knowledge, in psychology. And then a conclusion about the phenomenon they're studying, which is most likely probably going to be a cognitive process. So strengths limitations, just a reminder that they shouldn't write about small sample size because all IB, IAs have a small sample, so it's not really showing any critical thinking. And writing about avoidable errors, so they don't want to draw attention to the fact that their procedures were sloppy, I think is the point there. So they want to be really having a thorough analysis of their materials, their procedures, but anything that just looked like it was just sloppiness, it's not going to count, because that would, in some cases, that would reward poor planning. Okay, so having said that, this phrasing they use in the guide of avoidable errors, I mean, most of the errors are avoidable, but they might have, so I mean, it's just things that are overtly just sloppy. I would aim for one strength and one limitation for each of the sample design procedures. Now again, just a note on this, they say in the rubric that they have strengths and limitations of sample design and procedures. They state those three things. I think it's just sloppy writing, and you don't technically need, and students won't technically need one of each sample design procedures. I think realistically, if they had if they evaluated design and procedures really thoroughly and had a couple of points for each, and they didn't talk about their sample, I think realistically and in practice that's going to be fine. But what I would say is, because it's in the rubric, I would use this as a starting point. And if students are just saying, just a sample, I don't know what to write, but I've got heaps to write for this, use your judgment. I'd be tempted to say, okay, that's fine. Focus on your best points. Right, and again, if it comes down to word count, if you've got some really awesome, really thorough analysis of the procedures and the materials and what they did, and they're making a really weak point for their sample, again, you might be tempted to remove the sample because of the word count issue and focus on procedures. But they do say these three things in the rubric. So state and explain strengths, limitations, and I would have it so that the strengths come first, so sample design procedures, got your strengths, and then limitation, followed immediately by the relevant modification. Limitation, followed by modification, limitation, followed by modification. I think that's the best structure to use. One common error here is that the students need to really be specific, right? They can't just be vague or generalized. They have to connect to their study and their particular topic. That's the biggest issue with student explanations of limitations. So again, so modification should follow the limitation. And then here is time for students to talk about their strengths, limitations in their groups, and be writing up their report for themselves. Just so you know, this is where this year I had issues with plagiarism in the evaluation section. The design and the evaluation I had plagiarism issues, and so I would definitely recommend using Turnitin, and also just reminding students that they take notes together and they can evaluate their study together if they like, but their write-up has to be 100% their own. And then as they're working, you can project this up there, and this should be the general format that they could follow. Okay, and then we get into final touches.